Hey guys, good afternoon. It's Pablo with Meditation Amsterdam. And this is a fairly new type of video going on here because I've been giving some very tough feedback by a good friend of mine, Gloria, who specializes in social media. And now you can see I have myself a new mic for the sake of sound quality and bunch of other little tips that we've implemented around here. So hopefully that makes for a better video. Now in today's video, I wanted to talk about a topic that's always been kind of interesting to me, which is the question of why smart people are not necessarily the happiest people. And I was thinking about this during my my daily little park walk, and I think it's not that difficult to relate to this whole idea. There's even a certain type of a certain archetype or two that we could relate to. So there's the kind of tormented genius, or the tormented artist, who happens to be extremely prolific and extremely good at what they do, but at the same time, their personal life is just in shambles, or they're just not particularly happy. And there's also the typical example of the sort of grumpy, the grumpy philosopher, right? The sort of know-it-all, smart-ass type of guy who, is nevertheless kind of misanthropic. He doesn't get along with people too well. He's kind of reclusive and into his goes into these deep thinking rabbit holes. And next to him you'll have just like this just a simple farmer or whatever who's happy and big smile on his face, and it begs the question on whether it's true that ignorance is bliss. It begs the question on do we want to then stop acquiring more knowledge? Is it the excessive knowledge? We were even talking about this with buddies of mine the other day on comedians, actually, right? And just how often comedians are extremely intelligent, but also not particularly happy, and sometimes suicidal or alcoholic and things of that kind. Apparently, in the industry, there's even a running joke about whether when a comedian dies, whether the first question you ask is whether they kill themselves. So there's something going on there, and I thought I'd try to dissect the topic and see what we make of it. So. So the grumpy philosopher, right? Is it true? Is it true that ignorance is bliss? Is it true that you are better off just not knowing certain things? And I think I have the answer, and I think it doesn't have so much to do with knowledge or your ability to your intelligence, but rather with a couple of things. One of them being the expectations that you place on yourself, right? And the other one is the type of use that you make of your brain. So just how thinky you are. So let's start with the first one, right? And the first one I can relate to. I don't want to toot my own horn about being the particularly smart, but according to my mother, all right, as the ultimate source of how smart a kid is, I was quite precocious in terms of how I would talk and the things that I could understand at a young age, and that got me into a bit of an accelerated path through school, and through most of my school years, I was the top of the class. Out of 100 plus guys up until when we got to high school and I got into girls and stuff like that. So there was something there, but I still feel to this day the weight of being the smart guy, because it makes me less of a risk taker, and it makes me less less prone to error in what would be the good kind of being prone to error, which is to just try stuff out and experiment. So expectations can be very, very problematic when it comes to trying to always appear smart, or trying never to appear not smart to yourself. So you can be less prone to trying things out and just going with the flow of things. There is a test, or rather an experiment that was done, in which people were essentially split into two groups, and one of the groups was told well done when they did good in a little test, and it was kids, right? So it was like, oh, well done, let's now try for something else or whatever, if they did well. And then there was another group that whenever they did well got a little reward, and very quickly after that reward, it became apparent that the group that got the reward was no longer intrinsically motivated, but they also acquired this kind of idea about having done really well and trying to now maintain that self-image of the one who does well, right? So as in all our meditation and coaching discussions, ego rears its ugly head again, and ego is made up of expectations about things that you want to go well and things that you want to prevent that are going in a way that you don't want, right? So ego is this protective mechanism made up of expectations in time, in the future. It is also made up of regrets about the past, but it's constantly projecting itself into the future and trying to manipulate and manhandle its self-image and the outcome of things. So once again, when it comes to intelligence, if you have acquired a self-image about being smart, it's going to limit you, because now your expectation is that you always need to appear smart to yourself and to others, and therefore you are less likely to engage in free flow and experimentation about things, and that kind of saps away the joy of life, because you are just not flowing smoothly anymore. You are trying to kind of uphold a certain self-image that kind of tells you who you are, and then fear will arise, because less you can maintain your self-image as a smart person, then you don't know who you are anymore. So it's not so much that you are afraid to appear stupid. It is that you are afraid to not know who you are if you are not that smart person anymore. So that's the big fundamental fear. Now, this mechanism can be related to every other instance in which ego is interfering. So this is a funny one, because you would think like, hey, if I have a self-image about being smart, I've done very well in my life, and that gives me this self-image of being smart. That's a good thing. It helps my self-esteem. Now, it may appear to be that way, and for a part it can be, but it can so quickly revert against you, because it entraps you into certain ways of acting and certain ways of thinking about things. So by definition, a self-image is a limitation, regardless of whether that self-image is good or bad, right? So in the case of being smart, it appears to be a positive self-image of like, hey, I'm really smart or whatever, but it starts to wreak havoc very quickly when it plays itself out, and it lives out its benefits, and from that point on, it starts to become a very big limitation. You could see it with, there's a person that I know, for example, who is, essentially excels at everything that they do, but it carries for them massive expectations of winning every single time, and you can just see the tension, and you can see the disappointing and the dislike in their face whenever they don't win. Which makes it for a very poor learning experience, and it makes it that they may at some point start to become very limited and very selective in the types of activities that they engage, right? So expectation and ego and self-image in general makes for less happiness, and in the case of smart people, it just takes that particular flavor. It just takes the particular flavor of my self-image as a smart person, and then on we go with the inevitable consequences of trying to uphold that self-image and trying to let's say know who you are by the preservation of that self-image, and that's very damaging, obviously. Now then comes the more so that's kind of like what would you call it, spiritualish / psychological explanation of why smart people may be less happy. But I kind of sidetracked the question, because what I'm really answering with that one would have been, why do people who want to preserve a self-image of being smart are less happy, regardless of whether they're smart or not? Now we have the second one, which is how what we consider to be high IQ people could be less smart. And for this, I want to go into a certain test that they did about IQ, right? Or they've been tracking IQ over time. And the way we determine IQ is through a number of tests, like logical tests and maybe some math tests and basic mechanics or things of that kind. There's people who are particularly good at these things. And you see that IQ has increased over time. And it keeps increasing with every generation. IQ just gets higher. And it was really puzzling people of why that was the case, right? And this is a very interesting topic, I think. So it turns out that the ability, let's first dismiss what it's not. It is not because our brains are evolving at that pace, right? Like the pace of the increase of IQ across generations is too high to be explained through evolution. Brains don't change that fast, essentially, or they might under certain circumstances, but it's just not the case in human beings. So we have, you take someone from the Middle Ages or whatever, and the brain is pretty much the same. However, it turns out that what it is that our ability to conceptualize and abstract, to create abstractions or abstract thought, has grown phenomenally, right? So that so you see it with kids every single time, and we surprise ourselves, right? Like the kind of things that a kid would understand nowadays. I was talking to my 13-year-old nephew the other day, and he understands geopolitics, and he'll talk about this and that, and you're like, wow, how is it possible that a kid could understand all these things? He understands cryptocurrency. I'm barely getting to grips with that, what the hell that means and stuff, and they understand it equally. The reason for that is not that they're smarter than we were, but it is because as they learn, the kind of paradigms that are going into their minds already contain a number of abstractions that have been kind of dealt with implicitly, so to speak, right? So that if you were trying to explain to a kid in the Middle Ages what cryptocurrency means, not only would you have to go through a lot of, history about the digital age and whatever, but you would have to not just historically, but conceptually, you would have to explain a lot. And explanation, as in to make it explicit, right? To explicitly go through every step that led you up to cryptocurrency. But with a kid, you don't have to go through that explicitly, because they grow up in a medium and receiving information that already contains a lot of the explanations in an implicit kind of way, so that by the time you talk about cryptocurrency, you're talking about the abstraction of an abstraction of an abstraction. So, for example, before, so money in itself, or currency, is an abstraction in and of itself. So, you started to exchange goods at first. Somebody would make shoes and somebody else would be a farmer. They would exchange stuff, whatever. And then it became too complicated to do that. So we created currency. It was rather, created, discovered, whichever way you want to see it. But currency is an abstraction, right? And then digital currency, so your digital bank account, nobody has few people in the West at least have money anymore. We all carry a card, and that card and the digital credits that card contains are an abstraction of what used to be normal credits. So that's two abstract jumps. And then you go into crypto and so on. And the same could be said about pretty much anything, right? About, certain political things, or, what your mobile phone is all about. It's like it's abstraction upon abstraction upon abstraction. Now, why this long story about abstract thought and the fact that IQ goes up with it? Well, if you measure IQ like that, and then we call someone intelligent because they have a very high IQ, it would, logic would say that is a person who has an enormous ability for abstract thought, right? They have the ability to really create abstractions that are very, very far away from what a normal person can do, or maybe just far enough so that they appear fairly smart and so on. And that's where the problem comes in. Because, as it turns out, that IQ, that higher IQ, and that intelligence comes at a very high price. Every time you abstract away from something, you lose touch with the original something, right? So this is one of the reasons why we are out of touch with reality so much as of late. It is because our minds have created an abstract veil through which you can't see reality anymore. In fact, enlightenment, and one of the goals of meditation, if we want to call it a goal, is the ability to see reality raw. See bare reality without the filter of abstraction and the filter of judgment. And so the more you abstract and the higher your IQ goes because of that, the less you perceive. And happiness, perception is the depth of perception is the stuff of which happiness is made, right? To the degree that you are able to perceive deeply and completely is to the degree that you feel fulfilled. And so every time you abstract, you separate yourself from perception, from pure perception, and you separate yourself from reality, and you separate yourself from your sense of self, because your sense of self is made of perception, pure perception. And so all these abstraction steps are steps away from the self. They are steps away from the ongoing perception that you are, and towards this abstract world of concepts, which allow you to encompass many ideas into a single abstraction. But the more you do that, the more you are away from the real world, and the more you live in an abstract world that has no self and has no life, and therefore is barren and sort of this antiseptic, barren, eerie world of just concepts and ideas, as opposed to the rich. The salt of life is in the real perception of everything that is around you, and being very embodied and sensing things, right? Like sensing and perceiving things on an ongoing, non-judgmental and very complete and comprehensive basis. That's what happiness is made up of. So there's that, and of course, once you live in that abstract world, you live in a mind that is very prone to think and overthink and to judge. And judgment is the thing that also separates goody from baddie. That it parcels things out, and it creates classifications of those abstractions and those ideas. And it fragments the world between this yes and that no. And so because it fragments the world and your perception of it, it fragments you as well. So now you're divided, and you are trying to manipulate things around, and that is a sure recipe for unhappiness. So the grumpy intellectual is someone who judges too much. Essentially, he thinks too much, or he or she thinks too much, judges too much, and therefore divides himself and tries to find union in thinking further about things, and keeps digging into that rabbit hole, deeper and deeper of more thinking, where only more judgment, and only more division will be found, right? So the way out of judgment and thinking and abstraction is coming back into the world of sense perception, deep, rich, full acceptance of both good and bad, as part of the sensing and perceiving self that you are, and knowing self that you are, and that makes you happy. So the tormented artist and the grumpy intellectual and all those sort of archetypes of the smart person who is yet miserable are there as, I would say, tragic cases of someone who perhaps through the way they grew up, or perhaps through just the way their mind operates, are caught in a very abstract and very judgmental loop, and maybe even enforced by expectations of appearing to be smart, all of which take you away from a free-flowing perception, deep, accepting perception. Now, it's interesting because there's been times in my life where I have been the sort of tragic artist. Well, not so tragic. I mean, I was never, living on the streets or anything like that. But the relatively unhappy artist, or the insufferable little intellectual who simply wants to get it right, at the price of just being, happy. So that the ignorance is bliss starts to become a thing, not because knowing more makes you unhappy, but because judging is what makes you unhappy. That would be my take on the topic, right? So, can we be intellectual? Absolutely. Can there be a happy intellectual? Definitely, right? I mean, you have, Richard Feynman, for example, one of the greatest geniuses of our time, seemed to be a damn happy guy, actually. But he lived more by this, let's figure it out and let's experiment. I think you could call Richard Feynman one of the most smart people that has lived, because he was not stuck with his expectation about appearing to be a smart guy. He was just a damn curious guy, as opposed to trying to uphold, like, oh my God, now I'm being called a genius, so everything I do better be smart. He was never troubled with that. So he didn't have that expectation, and then ego didn't creep up and interfere with his intelligence. Rather, he was just experimenting and trying to figure things out, and he was, fairly. So that's an example of a very smart guy who was happy. I dare say Albert Einstein seemed to be very happy, and I think that he understood that overthinking was not what led him to genius, but rather, going into deep perceptual mode. And that allowed certain leaps of logic, and he could also focus very well. He probably also did have an enormous capacity for abstraction, but he was also very human, very connected to perceptual reality from what you read about the guy. So that's my take on it. That's why smart people can be sometimes fairly miserable. At least my take on it. I hope that gives you some thinking. Meditation, funny enough, is a move back to perception, right? It's back to the real, away from thinking and overthinking, and into observation of thought and of sensory perception, so that you can be in an ongoing flow of perception, and that's what meditation is about. I hope that helps. I hope that it helps you identify if you are like a grumpy genius, or a sort of introverted overthinker, that going into sense perception is the way out of that, and a way into a much richer and happier life, I would say. So hope that helps, and I'll be back with more. Cheers.